Alrighty, guys, welcome to the session with John Gualteri. I am excited for this session for a few different reasons. One of them is because I've actually been learning from John Gualteri myself for many years. I first got introduced to John's body of work and his perspectives, his principles, and his coaching, I say probably about 6 years ago or so. And I've plugged into his content and his coaching since then. And I've used it in many different areas of my life, besides actually even just sales, as good principle-based skills can tend to be applied in a lot of different areas. Now, before we dive in with John and unpack his 5-step process for converting leads to clients, let me tell you a little bit about him and what even qualifies him to speak about the subject. So what's so interesting about John is that in the last 5 years, of his business, he did $1 million in GCI. He pulled $1 million in GCI every year consecutively for the last 5 years of his business, which is not so easy to find, because oftentimes, somebody's on a roller coaster and they go up 1 year and down another, up 1 year and down another. But this guy did it consecutively every year for multiple years in a row. And then on top of that, what's even more rare is that he actually was able to sell his business. And very few real estate agents build a real estate business that's actually an asset that can be sellable. And John did that as well. So not only is he good at just actually getting clients and listings part of the business, but he's also great at knowing how to build an asset that's actually sellable. In 2007, John started the Gualteri Group, and he coaches a very small group of clients now, about 40 agents or so. And the worst performing agent is pulling about $250,000 GCI a year, and it ranges from that to $3 million in GCI per year with his upper clients. And they all build their business based upon these principles and the formula that John has. And what we're going to unpack today, again, is his 5-step process for turning leads into clients, and we're going to unpack also why it works so well. With that, John, welcome to the Get Listing Summit.
Well, thank you, Andrey. I appreciate being here. It's an honor.
It's an honor for us as well. I'm really excited to have you on here just because of the not only because you have the principles and the perspective, but you've also done this for many years in a row. Let me ask you this before we dive into the 5-step process. I want to ask you, what keeps most agents from being able to consecutively pull in, $250,000 a year or $500,000 a year in GCI, or like you, $1 million in GCI per year, 3, 4, 5 years in a row? Why is it that some agents, we see so many agents maybe supernova 1 year and then fizzle out and then come back and then maybe fizzle out again? What's going on behind the scenes to make that difference?
Well, that's a pretty big question. I'll try to give you a short and concise answer. I think there's 3 things that we need to take a look at. The first one is, I really do believe, from my own experience and experience with coaching, that some of us walk around with a self-sabotage switch that goes on and off. And it's amazing how we sabotage ourselves. And the way that I see it play out is that when there's inconsistencies like that, where they're doing really well and then poorly and then well, for reasons that I cannot comprehend, we stop doing the things that made us successful in the first place. So we have this success because we're doing certain things, and then we stop doing those things, and gee whiz, we fall off the wagon. And it's not a big mystery. The mystery is, why do we do that? Well, I don't know if it matters. What's important is that we don't do it. The second thing that think causes that phenomenon is a lack of desire and commitment on the part of agents, right? On the part of the person. Those 2 things, desire and commitment, to me, a coach can't create those in someone. A coach can use those things and harness those things to help someone reach really high levels of production, but we can't create those things as coaches. Those are things that are internal in the person. And then the third and final thing is a logistical thing, and that is a lack of systems. A lot of agents will just waltz through the year kind of flying by the seat of their pants, and the systems aren't in play. I was having a conversation just this morning with one of my clients, and this guy happens to be a great salesperson as well as a great business person. So his real estate practice has systems and policies and procedures and personnel, all of which give him leverage. Well, being a great salesperson and being a great business person are mutually exclusive typically. Typically, the really good salesperson is not a good business person, and the really good business person maybe is not so hot as a salesperson. Good news, bad news. Bad news,
Right.
You got to be both if you want high levels of consistent production. That's the bad news. The good news is you can learn. You can learn the skills.
So speaking of learning, when you and I got a chance to connect and speak before this interview, one of the things you had mentioned is they know your clients tend to want three things, right? Or they tend to get three things really out of working with you, which is a business that's high productivity, right? High profit, and just have a better lifestyle, right?
So I call that the Holy Trinity, right? They
Yeah.
want high levels of production, high profitability, and a great quality of life. And I will say that those things are attainable. I attain them. Our quality of life in this business is going to be a little different because our rest work cycles are very different than the rest of the world. But we can still have a really good quality of life within the context of our business. We're never going to be 9 to 5, 5 days a week, off on President's Day. You get the idea.
Right. Walk before we get into the 5-step process. Walk us through what your ladder of like the leads are. I don't remember quite exactly what you called it before when we spoke, but you have this ladder of lead in terms of quality of leads that comes in, and I'd like you to share that with everybody here on the summit, just the way you shared it with me, just so that everybody can write that down and kind of have a ranking of how you see the quality of leads, how you coach your clients, what the quality of leads is in order in ranking of quality.
Yeah, I'll do that, and if you don't mind, I'll take a little liberty to explain why it's so important.
Please.
I think that we've gotten to a place in this industry, Andrey, where we are really more focused on lead quantity than lead quality. And people, say to me all the time, I've got a bazillion leads coming in from here, there, and everywhere, kind of
right
thing. And oh boy, that's great. But at the end of the day, what's the quality? And you and I had talked, I guess it was last week, we were saying that the deal is on internet leads, for example, those platforms where they're putting a bazillion leads a month, 100, 200 a month into an agent's pipeline. The conversion rates on those, if you're really good, are 2%, right?
Right.
I mean, if you're like superhuman Hercules, maybe 4%, which means by definition, you've got to kiss 98 frogs to get to a couple of princesses. And we're both saying, I don't want to play that game. I really don't.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that game if that's what you want to play, but why would you want to play that game if there's a better way? And the better way is to focus in on lead quality and have systems in play to produce quality leads. We would rather have 100 or 200. We would rather have, 12 really good quality leads a month than 100 or 200 marginal quality. And so at the top of the ladder, the very best quality of lead, number one, is a repeat customer, a repeat client, somebody with whom we've done business before. Next best quality of lead is a referred client or customer. The third best quality of lead is this thing called social proof, which essentially are our online testimonials, which is you and I could talk about that subject for an hour, right?
Sure.
And most agents, I will admit, even really high producing agents, and I say this within the context of being a coach and an educator, not within the context of being judgmental. But sadly, most real estate agents do not even know what social proof is. But it's sad because it's the third best quality of lead on the planet, for crying out loud. I mean, we should know what it is. The fourth best quality of lead would be an inbound telephone call wherein that lead or that prospect is seeking more information, the price of the house, more information about the house. And people say to me all the time, well, that's no longer valid. People don't use the telephone anymore. If that's what you believe, you're right. But that's not really true. Just because someone believes that doesn't make it true. I mean, I have clients who are creating 100 or more of those calls inbound to their cell phone a month, where they get to have a live conversation with someone. Now, the fifth best quality call is now where we make outbound calls to the marketplace to people who have what I call a demonstrated need. They've already raised their hands and said, hey, I want to buy or sell real estate. The most notable examples would be expireds, for sale by owners, buyers who come into an open house. So that's your fifth best quality lead. And that's the first four are all inbound inquiries, right?
Right.
The fifth one is the first time we step out into the marketplace. Now, as we go down the ladder, it gets worse and worse. And what has happened in this business is that we've kind of focused all of our attention on these lower rungs of the ladder where the quality of leads aren't so good. And we struggle, right? And we relegated the best quality of leads to the back of the bus. Not a good plan. Not a good plan.
In interviewing a lot of the top performers and rock stars here on the summit, especially the agents who, the people who are just practicing agents right now, and they're not doing anything else. It's so interesting how when I look at all my notes from all the interviews that I've done, and I look for the common denominators, I like to look for and find patterns. One of the things that they pretty much all consistently bring up is the idea of sales skills and how it's lacking in many agents, how many agents do not pursue and do not build effective sales skills. And so I wonder if, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this, since about 2007, when the internet, since 2000, when the internet, I think right about 2001, when real estate, when using landing pages and search marketing became really hot in real estate because you could make money hand over fist doing it. You could get a lot of good leads, and it was new for consumers to engage with real estate agents in that way. So they weren't putting up barriers yet. I'm wondering if, because of how well just marketing worked in and of itself, for in the early 2000s, if that's not the reason for why most agents are still today just focused on marketing for lead generation, and they're forgetting about the skill side of it. And so because then they lack these skills, they're not creating systems of marketing that produce these higher value leads in inbound clients, because they don't even have the skill set to handle them as well. Whereas if you're doing just internet marketing, you can then put them on a drip campaign that's canned and done for you and all these other things, and you're just hoping that kind of business just comes out of it and just comes to you. What are your thoughts on specifically on that? What's causing the overfocus on lead generation without any attention to quality and sales skills?
This is a huge, Mount Olympus area. And so I will try my best to chunk it down and give everybody who's listening and watching this interview a simple way to look at it. So first and foremost, I think that one of the problems that we've got in this technological era is this whole idea of high tech versus high touch.
Okay.
And back in the day, there was a visionary. This guy's name was John Nesbitt, and he wrote a book entitled Megatrends. And in that book, he predicted that we would be in this technological era in which we find ourselves today. And he said, in that technological era where technology is king and it's changing so fast that we can barely keep up with it, and we can send a message around the globe in megaseconds, the temptation for businesses, and by the way, for our listening audience, if you are in the real estate business and you are an independent contractor, you are by definition a business, right?
Right.
But the temptation was going to be to use high tech as a substitute for high touch when we interact with prospects and clients. So we were going to use high tech, we were going to take technology, he said, and use it as a substitute for those interactions. And that was a huge mistake. And that what we needed to do instead was to use high tech as a way to facilitate high touch and not as a substitute for it. So part of the problem in this whole wheelhouse of lead generation and lead conversion is, I say this with a servant's heart, we've kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and we want to use technology as a substitute for high touch, and that's not going to work out very well, and it doesn't work out very well. We have to understand that nothing in this business happens until and unless we have this thing called a live conversation with a lead or a prospect. So the first issue is we, I believe, have kind of decided to lose this game by default by doing exactly what John Nesbitt said not to do, which was to use technology as a substitute for high touch instead of using it to facilitate it. That's the first issue. I always do things in threes because they're easy to remember. It's called the Greek rules of three, right?
Gotcha.
So the second issue that I see out there with our industry, and I was, again, just this morning on another coaching call discussing this with a client, is that we in the real estate industry, at least during my journey, have somehow or other transitioned to this place where we no longer see ourselves as salespeople. And I think a lot of it has to do with the internet. There are any number of companies nowadays who will take the burden or supposedly take the burden of lead generation off of our shoulders, right? They'll do our lead generation for us. Oh, it'll only cost you $2,500 or $3,500 a month in some cases, but they'll do it for us. You know, that was never the case. We were always responsible for that as agents and salespeople. Now, we're seeing more and more companies spring up who will say, we'll take the burden of lead conversion off your shoulders. Now, here's what I would tell you. The lead generation side of the equation, there are some great companies out there who do a really good job and do what they say they're going to do, right? And some of them do it at an excellent price. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention any of them on this interview.
No, go for it. Go for it.
But I would say one of my favorite companies is ProQuest Technologies. ProQuest Technologies, for a very reasonable, and underline the word very reasonable fee, if you follow the system that they introduced, it will put you belly to belly with prospects. It's a perfect company that's an example of using technology to facilitate high touch, not as a substitute for it. But getting back to this second leg of the stool, we don't see ourselves as salespeople. So as such, we don't see ourselves as needing sales skills, right? We can delegate the heavy lifting of lead generation and lead conversion. My goodness, right? Why the heck do we need those skills? And I will tell you this. If you want to grow your practice and if you want to have those three things, high productivity, high profitability, great quality of life, you're going to have to understand that you're in sales, right? And you can only delegate so much of lead generation and lead conversion. You can only outsource so much of it before it gets to the point where, hey, you know, if you don't start seeing yourself as a salesperson and engaging in high touch, you know, communication with clients and prospects and leads, you're not going to grow your practice, right? It's not going to happen. Third and final point here, and I don't mean to ramble on, but you asked a huge question, right? The third and final point here is that lead generation is the easy part of the equation. I know that sounds maybe counterintuitive, but it is. We can generate leads all day long. My gosh, I mean, there are plenty of companies, there's plenty of strategy. It is not easy, but it's straightforward and simple. Lead conversion is another conversation altogether. And the third and the final point is that this is another area where I believe we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. So including you know, delegating or outsourcing the heavy lifting of lead generation and lead conversion, we ourselves don't have these lead conversion skills. So I see it all the time where agents are spending mega bucks, right, generating leads, and then their conversion ratios are marginal. And a lot of it has to do with the quality of lead, like we already talked about, but even so, much of it has to do, even when the leads are good, right, good quality leads, has to do with our inability to convert. And the reason that we don't convert is because we don't have the necessary skill sets to do that. In this business, right, we need some skill sets. We need people skills. We need relationship skills. Most agents have that dialed, right? We need business skills. We need technology skills. We need sales skills. And if we're going to build a team, we better have leadership skills. And when I look at those 5 skill sets, we do an amazing job with our relationship skills. The other 4 skill sets, maybe technology, we're okay, right? The other 3, not so much. And here's the deal for everybody in the audience. The referral and repeat well of leads is a wonderful well. The water is sweet, it's cold, it's just nurturing. It's a wonderful way to do business. But that well has a finite amount of water in it every year. And the reason that it has a finite amount of water in it every year is because there are only so many relationships that we can effectively manage. I like the word honor better, right? The studies tell us it's about 150 people. If those people have significant others, that's 300 people. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of relationships to manage and honor. Well, if we want to grow our practice, then by definition, we have to dig other wells that are non-relationship based business. And if we don't have the skill sets to convert that non-relationship based business, we're not going to grow our practice. So I know I said a lot. I apologize for rambling on, but you asked me a big question, Andrey.
I know I did, and you gave a great answer. No apologies needed. So with that frame set, with having set that frame, let's then take a dive into the 5-step process then. I think this is a perfect point to get into it. So the 5-step process, you coach and share this with all your clients. You have them implement it, and obviously it works, and you've done it yourself too when you were a practicing agent. So let's go ahead and start unpacking that.
Okay, so let's begin with the end in mind, as the late, great Stephen Covey would say. Well, let's begin with the outcome that we want to create with the sales process.
Okay.
So I work with my team leaders, I work with their agents, I work with their inside salespeople, the ISAs. I work with them all on this process. And I always ask this question. When we're engaged with a lead, and let's be really clear, the preponderance, to use a $10 word, of lead conversion is lead converted to a prospect, prospect converted to a client, client converted to a raving fan. That's how we want to roll. A lead and prospect are not the same thing. A lead is a suspect. So when we engage with a lead for the first time, and we're going to use this sales process that I teach to convert that lead to a prospect. What is the outcome that we want to create with this process? We're going to use this process to create what? The answer I most often hear is we want an appointment. Right? The outcome we want to create is an appointment. The answer that I never hear, and when I say never, underline the word never here, is the right answer. And the answer is what we want to create with the sales process is trust. That's what we want to create with the sales process. So before I share the sales process, let's be real clear about the outcome that we want to create with this process. It's not an appointment, because if we create trust with people, an appointment will be the natural result, right?
Got it.
That'll just happen. So trust comes on 2 levels. People have to trust that we are people of good character, and they also have to trust that we're competent to do the job. So if I say, boy, Andrey, he's a great guy, I would trust that guy with my life, but as a real estate professional, he's a nincompoop, no deal, right?
Right.
On the other hand, if I say, that Andrey is the best real estate agent on the planet, man, that guy knows his stuff, but there's something about him that I just don't trust, right? Just something about his character. No deal. They're not going to do business with us. So we have to establish that trust on 2 levels with this sales process. And the way that we do that is by asking the right questions in the right sequence. And here's what I want everybody to take away. If you take nothing else away from this interview, if you're about ready to shut this off and say, man, this coach is like the most boring thing I've ever heard on the planet, he's full of it, please hang in there and just take this piece away, and then you can turn it off. These leads, these prospects, these clients, these raving fans will know more about whether or not they can trust us by the questions we ask them more than anything that we could ever tell them. They will know more about whether or not they can trust us by the questions we ask more than anything that we could ever tell them. Now, after that big mouthful, let me give you the sales process and a quick understanding of why we want to follow this sequence and why each point in the sequence is important. The first step in the sales process is what I call extend the conversation. If we engage with a non-relationship-based piece of business, a non-relationship-based lead, And that lead picks us up off in 30 seconds, right? We can't even remain in a dialogue with that individual for 30 seconds. We're cooked. Nothing else matters after that. If you can't learn how to extend the conversation to the point where you can get to the second part of the sales process, then you're basically out there trying to shoot an elephant with a BB gun.
Okay.
And I look at some of the lead platforms that are out there. ProQuest Technologies is one of them, and I can look at reports and tell, hey, this call came in. How long was that lead on the phone with our agent or our ISA? 30 seconds, 23 seconds, 76 seconds. I say to myself, these people are getting killed, right? Why? They don't have the skill sets to extend the conversation. Now, just that's an hour in itself. We could talk about how to do that, okay? And what we need to do. But it's paramount because everything else proceeds from there. Second step in the sales process that I teach is this thing my coach called it finding pain. I have clients who call it getting into the red. I have clients who call it finding the emotional drivers, right? I kind of like getting into the red. My client in Raleigh, North Carolina, Dolly Helbert, who is a $1 million+ GCI producer, by the way. And when I started working with Dolly, she was probably around 180. Okay, Dolly calls it getting into the red. And when she goes out on a listing appointment, she actually wears a red bracelet to remind her of this second step, right? And red is ostensibly the color of emotion. So
right.
She reminds herself to get to the emotional reasons behind why. And what we do typically as real estate agents is we exchange information. Oh, I want 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, or I'm listing and selling my home because I want to move to Arizona to be with my children. And we exchange information, and we mistake that exchange of information for understanding the reasons why they want something. I'll never forget when I was first learning this stuff, true story, I got on the call with a woman, and sometimes things just happen because you're working hard and they come out of you and it's like, oh my gosh, where do they come from? So I don't know why I asked her this question, but she said to me, we have to have 4 bedrooms. I said, okay, well, would you share with me why that's important? Now, prior to learning this stuff, I would just write down, okay, 4 bedrooms, what else? Right? And that's what most of us do. She said, well, we want each of the children to have a bedroom. I said, well, I get that. I said, you have 2 children. I guess the 4th bedroom, you want a guest bedroom. She said, no, that's going to be for my husband's office. I said, well, where's his office now? She said, it's in the master bedroom. And I said, well, why is that a problem? I said, he's in there during the day. Nobody's in the bedroom. She went off like a rocket. Are you kidding me? His stuff is everywhere. I can't even walk in there and sit down on the bed and put on my slippers because of his stuff all over the place. I want him out of that master bedroom. See, now we're making progress, right? Now we understand the emotional drivers behind why she wants what she wants, right? That's the hardest step in the process to learn. And I hate to sound like I'm being reverse sexist here, especially for men. The men that are my clients, man, trying to teach them this is like really an uphill battle. The women get it far much easier because women, I believe, are wired internally for that. You know what I mean?
Right.
To get to the emotional drivers. I've been married a long time. We were joking about it before we got started today. And, I'll ask my wife a question and man, trying to get a straight answer isn't happening, right? She'll go all over the map and tell you how she feels about stuff and so forth and so on. And you guys are sitting there like, well, you just get to the point. But that's not going to serve you well in sales. So step 1, extend the conversation. Step 2, get to the emotional drivers, get into the red, find out why emotionally something is important to a buyer or a seller, prospective buyer or seller. Third step just happens if we do a good job at step 2, and that is make a connection. Make a connection. When you made a bona fide connection. Well, what's a connection? A connection is that they get, you get them. They get that you get them. And boy, once that happens, it's a downhill roll from there. Okay, it's an uphill battle, steps 1 and 2. Step 3, you don't have to do anything except a good job in step 2. That connection happens. Now we're in business. Step 4, we qualify the prospect. this is the thing that's amazing to me. A lot of sales training or so-called sales training out there says qualify people up front. Find out that they're qualified to begin with. You don't want to spend a lot of time on the telephone watering dead plants. I think that argument just caves in on itself. Because here's the thing, if you haven't made a connection with somebody and you go to qualify them before making that connection, they're either going to give you pushback or they're going to lie to you.
Right.
There's no way that they're going to be receptive to the qualification process where you're going to qualify them as to their desire, need, ability, DNA, if you haven't made that connection. So to me, that argument falls totally apart there. Then the fifth and the final step in the sales process is what I call, and my coach taught me to call it this, is get a good upfront contract with the prospect. Well, what's that mean? That means that we exchange commitments. An upfront contract is an exchange of commitments about what exactly is going to happen next. And the best way that I can describe an upfront contract is by telling you what it isn't, okay? Here's what an upfront contract isn't. Well, Andrey, it's been terrific speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time today. I realize that you're not going to be ready to purchase a home in June, or I realize you're not ready to put your home on the market until June. So I'll give you a follow-up call in May. How's that sound? If you do that, you will call back in May, assuming that you're not too busy to call back, and they're going to say things like, oh, Andrey, you're not going to believe this, but we wandered into an open house and we loved it and we bought it. Oh, Andrey, thanks so much for calling. We already listed our home. Thanks so much for calling. We already sold our home. Andrey, who? I'm sorry, we're not interested. Oh, Andrey, thanks for calling. We're going in a different direction. That's what an upfront contract is not. But if you have a solid exchange of commitments about what's going to happen next and when, now we're in business. Now, each one of these steps in the sales process, with the exception of make a connection, is an hours of dialogue on how to roll through it. And by definition, it takes commitment on the part of agents to learn the sales process. Because what we do is we go in there and wing it. And all I would say is if you're now winging it, I say this again respectfully and with a servant's heart, if you're winging it with non-relationship-based business interchanges, calls, how's that working out for you?
Right.
Okay, man, you ask a lot of big questions, brother.
Well, I'm here to learn. So, the more I can learn, the better I become, and hopefully everybody else benefits too, obviously. Before I ask my next questions, looking at that list here on my notepad, I want to remind everybody that if you're an all-access pass ticket holder, one of your bonuses that ProQuest Technologies is providing is a entire five-part audio series from John A through Z on getting listings. And because John is the head trainer and coach for ProQuest Technologies and does that for their community, which is how I came across John, you'll get access to that if you're an all-access pass holder, you get access to that for free. So just a reminder for you guys, especially if you want to get more of this unpacked beyond the scope of this interview. With that, let me ask you this about point number one, which is extending the conversation. I've gone through a lot of this training and with you, right? I've listened to the coaching and I've practiced it myself, especially generating Craigslist calls years ago. And it's amazing how when you start doing things differently, it feels a little awkward at first, but then when it works so well, you just keep doing it because it works. What do you think is the hardest trip up inside an agent's brain about, or our brains as agents about being able to extend that conversation? Like, is there like one specific? There's no one thing that's going to solve it all. But is there is there like a one or 2 primary points to where if an agent could just rewire their thinking around this, it'll be easier to extend the conversation?
Yeah, great question. And here's what I would say: if there was one thing that I had to pinpoint, is that traditional sales training is telling us to be passionate and be enthusiastic and to, boy, that stuff's contagious and it's irresistible to the prospect. Listen, I've got news for you. It is resistible and repels the prospect when we do that. And I'll tell a quick story. And I'm not going to mention any names, but I was teaching someone how to extend the conversation with these inbound calls. And I said to this person, and this is the rub, you've got to watch your tonality. If you sound like a salesperson, an alarm is going to go off in that lead's head, and you're done. There's no way to recover once you set off that alarm. So be very, very careful of your tonality. You want to be the antithesis or the polar opposite of a salesperson's tonality, or what you think that is, and you want to be more like a customer service rep with your tonality, the way your voice sounds. So I had this conversation with him, and bless his heart, man, this dude, you know, when I lived in Philly, nobody said bless your heart, but when I moved to the South, right before they're ready to zang somebody, they say bless his heart, and then they go ahead and zang him. So I'm going to zang this poor guy. So he called me, left me a voicemail message. He said, you know, these inbound calls, they're not working out. Everybody's hanging up on me when I call. And I said, oh my gosh, there must be something wrong with the technology. So I called the tech guys, and I said, check out the technology on the system. He's getting a lot of hang-ups. They gave me no problem. So I called the guy, and I said, all right, here's the deal. There's nothing wrong with your technology. I want to role play with you, and I want you to answer the call exactly like you're answering it now, right? Ring, 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 hello. It's a beautiful day here in the blah, 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 blah. Thanks so much for calling. This is so-and-so from such and such. Which property may I price for you today, please? I said, Mary, Mother of God, you're scaring me, and I'm the coach, right? And it's a graphic example of, you know, how we roll with these calls. Listen, when you have an inbound call, even if you're making an outbound call, and you have that type of what I call phony enthusiasm going on, all you're going to do is want that person to get away from you as soon as humanly possible. Whereas if you have a customer service mentality, tonality, attitude, approach, you're going to get an entirely different outcome. So does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Why? It totally makes sense that, yeah, when you sound like a salesperson, all that phony enthusiasm, I think, is the perfect word for it, because when you sound all that, you know, hyper enthusiastic, and people know that you're probably not truly feeling that, it sets off all those salespeople alarms, right? It triggers that auto rejection. If you're not going to be that attitude, you're going to be more of a customer service rep type mindset, tonality. What would be the next thing then you would focus on in extending the conversation after that? If you made a switch from, okay, I'm not going to be like, hey, how's it going? It's Andrey. What can I do for you today? To, you know, hey, this is Andrey. What property are you calling about? Or something like that, right? Yeah. Where it's just kind of makes it safe for them to talk to you. What would be the next thing you would focus on?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I've got a few of my clients and a few ISAs, and again, there's a distinction between inbound and outbound calls, and of course, it fundamentally matters where the lead originated from in the first place. So you're gonna tweak this a little based on those things. But let's just say, for example, it's an inbound call, and the agents or the ISA's phone rings, and they see that it's an inbound call, you know, coming from one of their lead sources, and the technology is set up that way. We're not going to get into that in this interview. Many of the ISAs and clients that I coach are answering the phone this way. Good morning, good afternoon. This is John. Which property may I price for you today? Or which property may I provide information for you today, please? Right? Some of them even say, hi, this is John with ABC Real Estate Customer Service. Which property may I provide information for you today, please? Right? Mm. And it changes the dynamic at Jump Street. It truly does. And what you want to do and extend the conversation, since you've asked me about that, is you want to get up to this place where you ask a threshold question, right?
I was actually leading something like them, like, because if you started off as such a just relaxed customer service mind space, how do you then start transitioning it to just getting into the red, which is step number 2, right? Getting into the emotion. Yeah. Why would a customer service be rep asking me about, you know, why is this stuff important to me?
Yeah. So one of the best threshold questions that we can ask, okay, one of the best is, and this is a combination of my stuff and something another ISA that I work with came up with. So I've got to give her credit. Her name is Connie. She works for the Helbert team up in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so, you know, we took what I taught Connie, and then Connie put it on steroids. And so a threshold question sounds something like this. So Andrey, before we hang up, do you mind if I ask you one quick question?
That sounds brilliant. Yeah.
Before I hang up, or before we hang up, do you mind if I just ask you one quick question? Now, they're in customer service gear, this caller, right?
Right.
They're not being pounded around by a salesperson, right?
Sure.
We're not trying to, we heretofore, if we're doing this right, haven't tried to, pry and get information out of them. And it sounds like this. Before we hang up, do you mind if I just ask you one quick question? 99.8% of the time, they're going to say sure, right? Well, I'd really like to provide some feedback for our seller. So would you be kind enough to share with me, why did you call about this particular property? What did you like about it, right? That is a beautiful question, right? Why did you call about this particular property, semicolon? What did you like about it? And we're framing it within the context of offering our seller feedback. 99.8% of the time, they'll tell you, well, I really like the neighborhood, right? Or I really like the elevation, or I really like the school systems, okay? Which is our opportunity now to smoothly transition into step 2. So Andrey, when you say you really like the neighborhood, could you elaborate? What did you like about the neighborhood? And now we're in business, man, right?
Gotcha. Now you're getting into the red.
Yeah.
Got it. Which is, I was going to ask, what's one key 80-20 thing we could focus on for getting into the red? But the threshold question sets that up perfectly.
It tees up the ball.
So Andrey, John, before we hang up, do you mind if I just ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Brilliant, right? And then it's, hey, we just want to provide feedback for the seller. Can you tell me why you called about this home? Right? Is that what it sounds like?
Yeah. What did you like about it? And listen, I always tell the people that I work with, the idea here is not to create clones of me, God forbid, right?
Right.
Take this stuff and you need to make it your own. You need to Andreyize it, right?
Right.
Whatever. But see, we can tweak the strategy a little bit that way, but we never compromise on principle. We never compromise on the things we need to do to extend the conversation with our tonality. We never compromise on getting to that threshold question. See, this, and can you see how this is so different from winging it? Really?
Well, yeah. Well, it's so different from winging it completely, but it's also so different from, I would say, most traditional sales and prospecting scripts and training too. Sales training, certainly very incredibly different. And I know people that that coach something completely differently, and they have been successful with it. I'm not going to say that they haven't been successful with it, but I will say this though, the amount of energy that it takes to be successful with that approach is exponentially more than to be successful with this approach. This is from my own hands-on experience of having taken phone calls in the based upon traditional sales methods, and then having taken calls, inbound calls, say from Craigslist, with completely cold prospects and turning them into showing appointments right there on the phone, using this process.
Well, Andrey, I think that a point of clarification is in order at this juncture. I believe that the reason that the different approaches, and I agree with you, they can be effective, right? But they require a tremendous amount of energy. And I believe that what's different about this is with those other methodologies, the outcome that we want to create with those other methodologies is to, quote unquote, get an appointment with a client.
Right.
The outcome we're trying to create here is trust. And once we do that, it's smooth sailing, right?
Right. Yeah. The appointments and such almost become a bit of a byproduct. It's more fun this way too. I will say this is more fun because, again, just that you're just not trying to just hype up and create so much inflated energy just to, try to bowl people over or corral them into something. Let me ask you this. Are there any specific nuances or specific tidbits that you would say need to be crystallized around step number 3, making a connection? Because in step number 2, we're getting to the red. We've asked the threshold question. We've asked this, what I feel now is like the secondary threshold question, feedback for the seller question. Okay. They're talking, we're asking more whys. We're asking more whys. They share. We ask more why. That's already creating a connection. We're starting to naturally create a connection. But is there anything specific that you would say needs to be made sure that you check a box on when it comes to making a connection before you transition into qualifying the prospect, right?
Yeah. I know where you're going with this question. And again, it's step 2 where I say the eye of the devil lives. In step 2 is finding that getting into the red, finding that. It's intangible, and I know that it sounds counterintuitive. Making that connection is something that's glorious because you know it happens. You know it happens. And let me give you a great example of that because I think it'll speak to your question. I can remember very vividly sitting at the table with a woman, I guess I'm going about 10 years ago. And maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was about 12 years ago. And she was a senior and / empty nester and had just lost her husband about 6 months ago. Prior to that appointment, someone told her that she needed to interview 3 real estate agents. I was the 3rd one in by design, right? And I sat with her, and for an entire hour, we talked nothing about real estate. We talked about how difficult it was for her now that her husband was passed away, and how this transition was really not in many ways very positive for her emotionally. And we talked about how it was hard for her to keep up the house alone, but if she had her choice, she would stay there, and how she raised her children there, and there were memories there. We didn't even touch on real estate. And it's a quintessential example of making sure that we stay in step 2. Now, by the way, we have to stay in step 2 with the servant's heart. If we think that we're going to manipulate people, this is something you can't fake, Right. Trying to understand the emotional drivers behind why somebody wants what they want or why they're doing what they're doing. And sometimes it's positive. In this case, it wasn't really a happy time for her. But that takes a servant's heart, right? You can't manipulate or fake that. At any rate, not to imply that I'm a saint. I'm no choir boy, you know that, right? But I did get this part dialed. I did. And so anyway, we talked for an hour about that stuff. And she said, John, I had interviewed 2 other real estate agents, and I can tell you right now, I'm choosing you. Just tell me what we need to list the house for and what to sign. That was literally my listing appointment. And again, this sounds so counterintuitive, and I will probably lose some people when I say this, because there are people in my business who categorically disagree with me on this point. But if you hang with me and just let me explain, I think maybe you'll be a little more open-minded if that's you. On things like listing appointments, right? The focus is always on the presentation, the centerpiece, right? No, the centerpiece is always finding that pain, finding the emotional drivers. That's your centerpiece in sales skills. And oftentimes when you do that, there is no presentation. People will say, I want to hire you. Where do I sign? Literally, that'll happen. The trust level goes so sky high that the presentation isn't necessary. Now, that having been said, do I think a presentation is important? Yes, sometimes, but it is never the centerpiece. And I will debate anybody, anytime, anywhere, and forget about my personal track record. I stand on the track record of my clients, right? That are using this stuff and making between $250 and $3 million a year, right? That's the proof is in the pudding, not my opinion.
Right. I like that.
Does that make sense?
It does.
The eye of the devil is in step 2.
Got it. Okay. Do you have any advice for how we can naturally then keep continuing to use the servant's heart? How can we transition from step 2 and 3, if we kind of see them almost as in lockstep? How do we transition into qualifying the prospect without accidentally reverting into closing techniques or other traditional sales methods?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because
you get what I'm saying, right? Like, how do we go from having a great conversation to now suddenly making the person feel like, wait, something's happening. It's changing.
Yeah, I can only tell you how I did it and how I taught my team to do it and how I teach my clients and their staff and sales agents and ISAs to do it. But it's funny because when you asked that question just now, I found myself thinking, everybody's always asking me how to handle objections, right?
Right.
And I think that's an appropriate question, but here's the deal, guys. If you do a really good job with the sales process, the number of objections you're going to get are going to be minuscule. They're almost non-existent. They truly are. But the way that I made that transition was very naturally and very, very smoothly, right? Just like transitioning into that threshold question. And I would literally repeat back all of the emotional drivers that I found. And let's use like a positive situation here. So Sally, listen, what I'm getting from you is that your husband got this great promotion, that you've got some good equity in your home, and now's the perfect time for you all to move because the kids are getting older. You guys are crowded in there. I don't repeat back all of the things that we talked about. And I would say, well, listen, it sounds like that maybe we should get together at some point. But before we even talk about that, do you mind if I ask you a question? See, for me, it was always, do you mind if I ask you a question? Or do you mind if I ask you one more question before we hang up? It was always asking permission to ask the question. And again, what are we qualifying on? DNA, desire, need, ability, right? Mm-hmm. So I always ask 1 to 7 questions, right? 1 to 7 questions. I never ask 1 to 10 questions. So people say on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 1 being this and 10 being that, where are you? And they give you a 5, you got nothing, right? 5 is like tepid, it's lukewarm, it doesn't tell you anything. 1 to 7, they have to be above or below the energy line. Fair enough?
Right.
Now, look, there are some smart Alex that'll say that I'm a 3.5, but that rarely ever happens, right? So I would always ask a 3-sequence questions. I say, do you mind if I ask you one more question, right? Or do you mind if I ask you a question? Well, usually it was several questions. So Sally, on a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being you guys aren't ready at all to make a move, and 7, you're absolutely ready now. Where are you on that scale? Well, John, we're probably a 5. Okay, could you share with me, question 2, why are you a 5? Well, we're a 5 because da 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 da. Okay, I get it. So let me ask you this. What would have to happen for you guys to be a 6? Right? And then they'll tell you. But that's how you segue into qualifying them, or at least that's what I teach. It's very non-threatening, right? And there are several other questions that you ask in the qualifying process. But I call that the 1 to 7 sequence of questions. On a scale of 1 to 7, how ready are you to do this? It speaks to desire, right?
Right.
It speaks to desire. So there, again, we could take any one of these and spend an hour on it, but you get the idea.
Right. No, I do. And I'm taking notes here on it. Let's then unpack a little bit about the last step then, which is to get a good contract, get a good upfront contract, where, some people, when you say contract, they might think paper contract, but what you're saying is a verbal agreement, right?
A verbal exchange of
right. A verbal contract. Let's say we've walked through the qualifying process. I've told you I'm a 5 for argument's sake on a scale of 1 to 7. I tell you why I'm a 5, right? Is because let's say I've got pressure. I'm taking a new job in 3 months, starting a new place. So that's why I'm a 5. Like, it's got to happen soon. I've got to sell. Let's say I'm a seller. So I'm a 5. I tell you what it might take me to make a 6, etc. Now we're going to go into step number 5, which is getting a good upfront contract. Okay. Walk me through what that would look like in a way to where I feel like it serves me as well, the homeowner.
Again, I always go with dialogues that we make our own. I don't like the word scripts because it sounds too much like a telemarketer, right? Okay. So I always share dialogues, like, the dialogue to get to a threshold question, the dialogue to 1 to 7, to segue into qualifying. This is the dialogue that I teach to segue into step 5. And it sounds like this. Andrey, in my business, I always have to walk a very thin line between providing good service and good follow-up and pestering people. And I certainly don't want to pester you. And I don't think you would want that either. Fair enough?
Right.
So before we hang up, do you mind if we just talk really briefly about what good service and good follow-up is going to look like for you? You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Not, I'll follow up with you in June, right?
Right.
Have a conversation about what good service and good follow-up is going to look like for you. And they're going to say 99.8% of the time, sure, okay? And then I would say, look, it depends on the call, it depends on the situation, but you're moving, right? So Andrey, for you, can I make a suggestion? And I just want to get your feedback on it. My suggestion would be, I know you're not quite ready to list your home for sale, but heck, you're out of here in 90 days. Fair enough.
Right.
So my suggestion is maybe the next logical step is to have me just take a quick look at the house, maybe 30, 40 minutes. I want to go on record and saying, I get it. You're not ready to list when I come out. I understand that. But at least that way I can give you an idea of what maybe you need to be thinking about doing to get the house ready for sale and maybe give you an idea of price. Does that sound fair? Right? That's in the situation you painted for me. If it's a buyer, it may be something very different, right?
Right.
It depends on what, their level of urgency, in the qualifying step. What happens next? If they say
Gotcha.
next May, different conversation, but you always transition with the same thing. Andrey, in my business, I've got to walk a really thin line between providing good service and follow-up for people and pestering them, and I really don't want to pester you, and I know you don't want that either. So before we hang up, do you mind if we just take a minute here and talk about what good service and good follow-up is going to look like for you? I'm telling you, man, that works almost all the time. Nothing works all the time, but it works almost all the time.
Right. Well, and if you've gone through steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, then at that point, by step 5, if you've done them all right, they want to hear from you. They like hearing you. If you made that connection, they're enjoying talking to you. They'll be more likely probably to give you permission and come into agreement with you for you to follow up a lot more frequently than, well, call me in 3 months or call me in 6 months. And then if they've told you that they're okay with that and want that, then when you do it, they're okay with it. They can't be upset at it. They can't be annoyed by it. They don't see you as a salesperson because of it, because they've already told you they want that.
No,
right?
exactly.
They've come into agreement with you on it.
Yeah, well, look, the deal is that, contingent of these people, you're going to be, you're going to be in touch with them in a few days if there's a sense of urgency.
Right.
Like,
Let me ask you this. Do you ever do something like where you really break down, like, okay, so what's going to happen next is I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to do A, B, C. Do you ever do it like that?
Sure, with a buyer,
if it makes sense.
Yeah. What they may do is, you're going to get in touch with our mortgage lender. You're going to get yourself pre-approved for your loan, right? I'm going to make sure that, they make contact with you. Is it okay to share your email and your cell phone number? That kind of thing. We've already set the table previously. We know their situation. We know what's going on. But then in step 5, we've got to get an agreement about what happens next and when, right? Now, the stuff that's closer in is easy. The stuff that's later on, somebody's 3 or 4 or 5 months down the road, well, that's a whole different conversation in terms of what that follow-up looks like.
Right.
And it's different with a buyer and a seller. Okay, it's very, very different. Now, when the best, and again, ad nausea, right? These steps, with the exception of make the connection, are an hour, 2 hours. The finding pain, 8 hours. Conversation on how we do that. This is why these sales skills are so seldom committed to by agents, because it takes work, right, to internalize them, understand them. But boy, once you do, to quote Mick from the first Rocky, when he's telling Rocky, you're going to become a southpaw and a regular fighter, and you're going to become a very dangerous person, right? So once you learn this stuff, you become dangerous out there. I mean, you are really you're really killing it. But the best thing that you can do with later on business is the thing that we don't want to do because it takes 5 minutes, and that is you write a handwritten thank you note and you put it in the mail no later than the next day. if you want people to remember you, that's a high touch move with later on business, 3 to 4 to 5 months out or more, that will absolutely cement who you are in their mind.
Especially if they were just like an inbound call and weren't a repeat person who already knows you face to face.
Exactly.
So with probably with a referral or anything else down that quality ladder, that thank you note certainly should go out. Should it go out with a repeat call, or at that point, I mean,
I would say that it depends on
okay.
How well you've honored that relationship. But at the end of the day, this is one of those high touch things for which there is no substitute.
Yeah, and you can't hurt, right? So, yeah, and then certainly anything on rung 2 or down, referral, social proof, inbound call, etc., outbound call is definitely worthy of a follow up note like that. Especially like you're saying, if it's a longer range business, which is what, 3 months or more.
I would say 4 months or more.
4 months or more.
If they're 120 days or more out, it's longer term business. You're going to have to do more follow up. Typically, what I find is agents who have people 4 months and in are can manage that stuff pretty well. Right.
Gotcha. Okay. What do you think about the idea of let's say somebody is a client where they're longer term out, a little bit longer range out, and putting them on a property drip and then following up with phone calls around, did you see anything you liked, et cetera, for, when we're, they might be selling their home. So you're going to have to list their home, but first they want to find a home that they want to buy first. Are you a fan of, or do you support or advise that put people on drips and then follow up with them via phone around those drips, constantly following up with them? Or do you recommend a slightly different way of doing the follow-up process on somebody who, let's say they're listing, but they also need to buy a home?
Yeah, the answer is all of the above. And I mean that sincerely. I'm an advocate of all of the above, with the caveat that you and that prospect now, right? If you've gotten to step 5 where you're exchanging commitments, you have officially actually gone through the conversion of the lead to a prospect once you make the connection. In my opinion, that's step 3. Now we've converted the lead to a prospect. So now that we have this prospect and we need to follow up with them, I'm an advocate of all of those things, with the understanding that we've had that upfront contract conversation with them.
Got it.
Each time that we follow up with a phone call, we revisit the upfront contract each and every time.
How does that sound? What does that sound like in a dialogue?
So somebody is maybe buying a house, 5 months from now, and I call you back. What happens in the first 30 days is a little different, right? But say I'm calling you back now 6 weeks later and say, so Andrey, last time we talked, right? Last time that we had spoken, you told me that you guys probably would be ready to be sampling some homes, going out and looking some homes in the marketplace around now. Just calling to take your temperature. Are you there yet? Are we ready to start looking at some stuff? You know what I mean? Because I set the table for that last phone call.
Gotcha.
So the answer is yes, but always be redefining and renegotiating your upfront contract about what happens next. Right?
Got it.
Exactly what's going to happen next, and exactly when it is. The mistake that we make is that we don't do that, and then we call back and say, Andrey, it's me, just following up, right? Where are you guys? Right? No, Andrey, this is what we talked about last time. Are you ready to do that yet? With a seller, for me, it was always pushing to get in the door. Andrey, I'd shared with you last time that we had spoken that it's probably a good idea for me to come out and give you an idea what the home is worth. And we said that next time I call, you might be ready to do that. Are you ready yet? You know what I mean? Well, no, not quite ready. So tell me what's going on. We have another Well, listen, before I hang up, we're having look, Andrey, I shared with you way back when that I certainly don't want to pester you guys, but I want to get good follow-up. So before I hang up, do you mind if I just ask you a question? When do you think you'll be ready now? With all that's going on for me to come on. Well, we'd probably be ready in, beginning of March. Okay, great. So listen, when I call you back, 30 days from now, roughly, I'll call you in February. We'll revisit this, and I'll tell you that I'm ready to come out and look at the property now. Are you? Fair enough. It's sort of how you roll. You always hit the reset button with the upfront contract. Makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like what you were saying too earlier about when you, let's say you're taking an inbound call from a seller, for example, and you're talking about, coming out and saying, hey, at least for me to look at the house and see the house, can it help me tell you how to prepare for selling it, et cetera. And obviously you want to do that with any seller lead or seller prospect, regardless probably of how far out, no matter how far out their selling process is, right? Like, let's say they might be not even selling for 6 months or 9 months. You probably, if you can, you're still going to try to ask for just going out and meeting with them right away. Is that true?
It's true. And, again, the idea is to create trust continually. Just like you're resetting the upfront contract continually, you're always creating trust. Always be creating trust. Always be in that gear. And so what you want to do is establish a relationship with these longer term prospects over time, where when the time comes, you're the person. According to the National Association of Realtors Profile of Home Buyers and Home Sellers 2015, I don't think 2016 is out yet, but the vast majority of sellers only interview one agent, contrary to popular belief. Well, if you've created that relationship of trust, guess what? You're going to be the one.
Right. And there's a statistic that says that 74% of people do business with the first agent that they have a meaningful conversation with or a connection with.
Yeah, on the buyer side. Absolutely.
On the buyer side. Got it, on the buyer side. Let me ask you this. So just as we're wrapping up here, before we end the interview, see what I did there?
Let me ask you one more question before we
before we end the interview, can I ask you one more question? You mind if I ask you one more question, John? You said something earlier that I want to just unpack a little bit, and that was with the listing presentation. You said you would debate anybody anytime about whether the listing presentation should be the central theme of the listing appointment or not. Walk me through a little bit about some of the since you know what traditional coaching might look like around listing presentations, walk me through what your coaching advises is not what the listing presentation is, or how yours is different, how yours isn't what most people would think of as a listing presentation. So you're saying, let's say I'm your client and I'm going to a listing appointment. Let's say it's my first one, and you're coaching me, right? You're prepping me for it, and you're telling me that my listing presentation is not the core focus of my listing appointment.
Right.
So what is?
So what is
sorry. So one last thing to add. So in the 5-step lead conversion process, the main goal is trust, not an appointment. Trust. So the second part of this same question is, what's the main goal of the listing appointment?
So the main goal of the listing appointment is to create trust.
Okay. Okay.
Not to get the listing. Okay.
Okay.
It's to create trust. You create trust, you'll get the listing. And so, what ends up happening, and by the way, I just want to make a distinction between establishing rapport and creating trust. They are as different as night and day. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. You can have rapport with somebody at a coffee shop or in a bar, but that doesn't mean that they're
not even in the same wheelhouse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the centerpiece, what I teach is the centerpiece of your listing appointment, not the listing presentation. The centerpiece of your listing appointment is creating trust. Now, when I used to go to a listing appointment, and this is what I taught my agents when I had a team, this is what I teach my clients, is I would create a little rapport, and then I would say, Andrey, do you mind if we sit down at the kitchen table for just a few minutes? I'd like to get to know you a little better, a little more about your situation. And by the way, Mrs. Andrey wasn't, on the phone when we spoke. So I'd really like to hear things from your wife's perspective or your husband's perspective. See, most of the time when we make those appointments, we've only spoken to one person in the relationship. We haven't spoken to the significant other. And most of the time, there's a significant other. And I would sit at the table and go through that, finding the emotional drivers, that getting into the red step all over again, right? Now, what most agents do is they go through the house and they tell me, well, I go through the house first and I take notes and it's a chance for me to bond with the seller. Nonsense. There's no way you're going to bond with the seller while you're walking through the house and they're telling you how terrific their house is and why it's better than the guys next door because they've got a super duper humidifier on their HVAC system, right? You can't do that. You cannot be prospect-centered or client-centered, is what I call it, when you're walking around taking notes, seeing the house. Do you maybe build stronger rapport? Yeah, I'll give you that. But bond. That's all we hear. Bond with them when I walk around the house. Nonsense. That's nonsense. So the centerpiece of your listing presentation is sitting down and intentionally and deliberately not only revisiting that second step in the sales process, but doing so with another party who wasn't present when you did it the first time and getting his or her perspective on that whole wheelhouse. There's your centerpiece right there. Now, that's the centerpiece of your listing appointment, right? The centerpiece of your listing presentation is why they should hire you. Why they should hire you.
Got it.
Now, most agents will say, because we got the best marketing system and we've got the best website and we put your house out on all these things. Look, guys, that stuff is important. But people are going to hire you, or they should hire you, based on the results that you achieved in the marketplace for other people. And again, that's a whole nother conversation. But I would hit that nail right on the head in my listing presentation, assuming that I had to go there, because sometimes I didn't, as in the case I told you earlier, right? I didn't even have to give a presentation. They said, "We'll take it," right?
Right.
Where do we sign? What price should we, put on it? But when I did go into my listing presentation, again, the centerpiece of my listing presentation was not my marketing plan, right? My 23-point marketing plan, which I had one, okay? It was why you should hire me. And you're not, look, by the time, if they're interviewing, especially more than one agent, by the time they get around to the third agent, this stuff is all running together in their head, right? And very few real estate agents will boldly stand up and say, figuratively stand up and say, this is why you should hire me, based on these results that I've gotten in the marketplace for others. So that is your centerpiece of your presentation. Creating trust is the centerpiece of your appointment, if you make that distinction. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. What do I do if I'm new to a market? Like, let's say I'm either a brand new agent or I'm new to a market and I used to be in another market where I got results, but in this market I'm new. How do I effectively drive home the message of why you should hire me?
Well, God willing, if that's your situation, you have chosen a company that has a good track record. And so you talk about the results that your company has gotten in the marketplace for others versus your own. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about this process or this overall process that I should have asked you? Or is there anything that you want to make sure we clarify before we end the interview?
Yeah, I don't know about clarify or anything new. I think that maybe just retracing some steps, and that is, if we're going to talk about why exactly agents should be committed to learning such a sales process, it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this interview. If you want to expand your business, if you want to grow your real estate practice, by definition, you're going to have to go into non-relationship-based business. There's only so much water in the relationship-based well annually. And if you're going to go into that game, there's two choices, right? The first choice is to create marginal leads and have a marginal chance of converting those leads because your sales skills are poor, right? That's one way to grow, marginal, right? And I one of the things that drives me crazier than no results is when people say, well, I'm doing 3 or 4 transactions a year off of that thing. It's paying for itself. Are you kidding me? That's like kissing your sister, right? Why aren't you demanding stellar results from it? Really? I mean, come on, man. Like, it's paying for itself? Really? That's all you wanted to do is pay for itself? I want it to pay for itself 10 times over. So it drives me crazy, as you can tell. But anyway, if, on the other hand, we make a commitment to driving in quality leads in this non-relationship-based wheelhouse, and we make a commitment to have outstanding conversion skills, well, wow, now we're having a different conversation, right? And again, I don't want people to take my word for it. I don't want them to take my history. I want them to take a look at the people that I coach and the results that they're getting and make the judgment on whether or not I speak the truth based on those results, right? That's the proof in the pudding.
I like that. Well, John, on behalf of everybody here at the Get Listing Summit, I just want to say that we appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing this process and this method that typically you only coach for your private clients. So thank you. Big thank you for coming on and sharing so openly.
It was my great pleasure, and I'll see you on the next summit.
Hopefully so. Thanks, John.
Be well.